Well, to start, I have no idea what happened before. If you have introduced me, fine. I'm absolutely sure you did, Gina and Ian, so thanks for that. And our item, environmental sustainability. We, in our working group, are of course all aware that the performing arts sector has produced already an enormous wide range of best practice studies, congresses, publications, and declarations on this issue of environmental issues. Our group, far away from unrolling an appropriate overview or reinventing the wheel, focused our discussion within the last 6 months on, well, the main area of theater-specific contributions and needs to stop, slow, or even reverse the climate catastrophe within the Green EU deal and beyond. One second item which I would like to point out at this morning, was that issue that under and after the pandemic, the issue is unsolved of growing inequality, the need for a kind of mobility justice in international co-working, a preferential treatment, as the UNESCO said, with partners or weaker partners within the EU and beyond. Or like I very recently read in a statement by the Belgian choreographer, Mohamed Takourabi, in his statement, this is about white privilege, pushing people out of borders while claiming them back in online. Let me introduce my colleagues from the working group who are covering a rather wide range of the performing arts sector, since the item itself we are dealing with is already very transversal. It's Iphigenia Taxopoulou, the General Secretary of Mythos 21, a European theater network based in Thessaloniki, Greece. She will moderate session 2. Anita De Beer, Director of PEARL, the Performing Arts Employers Association and European Federation of Music and Live Performance Organizations based in Brussels, Belgium. She will introduce session 1. Elisabeth Schweger, Artistic Director of the Academy of Performing Arts Baden-Württemberg in Ludwigsburg, Germany. And Stefan Fischer-Fels, Artistic Director of Junges Schauspiel Düsseldorf, Germany, and board member of Assitej International. We have today 2 sessions, 1 intervention and a summing up discussion. They are running successively, not parallel. The discussion at session 1 will search for cross-sectoral synergies for culture and environmental sustainability at 10:30. Session 2 looks closer to art production to find out how environmental sustainability could be embedded in the theater and performing arts sector. So it goes more to the process itself, 11:30. I will not list all the great names at this point, since the moderator will introduce each participant appropriately at the beginning of each session. Only 2 guests I will already announce yet. At 12:15, we welcome 2 members of the European Parliament for the concluding discussions. It's Laurence Farin from France, from Renew the Europe group, and Niklas Ninas, Germany, from the Green Party. So this is our schedule, but do we have a plan? You have no plan is our today's wake-up call from the rather unrepresented or underrepresented perspective of passionate theater audience and Friday for Future activists, live from Düsseldorf and introduced by Stefan Fischer-Fels. Stefan, are you there?
Yes, I'm there. Live in Düsseldorf studio. Can you hear me and can you see me? Hello, hello. I'm there. Yeah. Hello, live from Düsseldorf studio. Can you hear me? Well, Dear friends of Sustainable Theater, we are here in the studio of Düsseldorfer Schauspielhaus, which is closed since March. And so this is the first performance since half a year that we are doing in the studio of Junges Schauspielhaus in Düsseldorf. When we prepared the session, we wanted to hear young voices, to have young voices heard. So I'm very proud and honored to introduce Tara and Dario. Tara is 15 years old and Dario is 16 years old, so he can already vote. You're not. And they are absolutely theater enthusiasts and activists at Fridays for Future in Düsseldorf. So they thought about theater and sustainability in the last weeks and months, and they wrote a text, and now they will read this text to wake us up and to ask us very serious questions. They will present now, and I'm very curious because they not only wrote this text totally by themselves, but also translated it into English. That means that you are really able to do that. I would not be able to do that. After this speech, we will meet Lynn Takeo Musiol, dramaturg at Düsseldorfer Schauspielhaus. Her contributions to sustainability on Nachtkritik tackled the issue on very different and very deep perspectives. So she will have a small talk with Tara and Dario. And now, welcome Tara and Dario, and here's the time and the space for your speech.
Great. Sustainability. What is sustainability? What is sustainability for you guys? And what is sustainability for theater? Every year there is new plays, premieres, sets, costumes, and ideas. But for whom? For the public? For you? Who are you doing theater for?
I know some of you have decided to make theater in order to follow the traces of Sophocles, Seneca, Shakespeare, and Zizek, to leave new and own traces. Some of you wanted to remake, redevelop, explore, and study theater to create, animate, and manifest memory. To find oneself, to find the spirit of mankind, to find the meaning of mankind. But I also know most of you started to make theater for people, with the people. Now, take a moment to ask yourselves whether you have remained faithful to your dogmas, to your primitives, ideals, and hopes.
These thoughts we should remember.
I myself grew up in theater, I lived in theater, and I still live in theater. So I have seen more plays than all of my teachers. I have experienced more theater than most, or even almost anyone of my age. So I am, like you, a one-track specialist. I'd even say a nerd. And by this, I have to admit self-critically that I also enjoy long, deep philosophical performances that completely overwhelm, let's say, normal people. But these plays don't sell, if we're honest, do they? They are, and even worse, they create prejudices among people who have no, or at least not that amount of experience with theater as we do. They are heavenly sweet, but deadly fruits of the forbidden tree, because only big houses and big theaters can afford such work. Now, I'm sorry, I'm not saying that we should have 5 Midsummer Night Dreams a year by reusing the plays. But what I am saying is that we should have one for more than a year, because sustainability is not only to reuse plastic bottles and stage sets, but to reuse plays.
Do there have to be that many new plays each year? This we should remember. Do there have to be that many sets suitable for only one stage? This we should remember.
There was once the idea of building all the stages according to the same dimensions. If we take a moment to think about the benefits of having all the stages the same size, the main thing we will notice is that it doesn't matter which stage we're performing on. Is that bad or boring? I don't think so, but if we do, we will realize that we can perform the same piece anywhere in Europe. And okay, maybe we have problems with the language, never mind. It would already be a great step forward to perform nationwide within the country. Now, we could bring the theater to the people, not the other way around. Because what that would change, based on the classic example of carbon dioxide emissions, would be that if thousands of people no longer drive hundreds of kilometers for an evening, but 10, I think we should remember that. We all are aware that what you could do small scale, like acting global, right? Stuff we all think about when we ask what we could do to save the environment. I mean, like watch out for what you eat, regional food, try out some vegan or vegetarian options from time to time. Avoid unnecessary packages, save printed paper, use renewable energy, and blah, blah, blah. But I guess you already knew that, right? That is not why we are here. The reason we are here, joined at this forum, is that we have something bigger to work on together. Given the fact that all stages are entirely different right now, we have to start working with what we already have. So let's start with a simple, yet I think powerful step. Publish your data. Don't make potential guests ask for the exact dimensions and technical features. Have the stages measures and your basic equipment published on your website. Like banal information, like what type of cable you use. Do you have both dimmed and undimmed lines? Can or can't LEDs be used? Which mixing desk you have for both lighting and audio? I think you get my point. Thank you. The amazing thing, the one that gives us hope, is that many problems today already have solutions. They are somewhere out there. There is no need to reinvent the wheel, as we say in Germany.
To come back to the question at the beginning, for me, sustainability is an awareness of nature, to live socially towards fellow human beings and the environment, not just paying attention to the moment, but also realizing the long-term effects of my actions. This is where theater is to be political.
We have now been talking about how to make ourselves more sustainable, but the special thing about theater, the thing that makes it relevant to society, is that culture makes up people's minds, people's morality, and people's priorities. Be aware of this opportunity, but also this duty. Most of you will have heard about Bertolt Brecht and Hannah Arendt. So you know exactly that theater has always been political and will always be political. We always have to keep this in mind whenever we are doing anything.
Especially now, through the compulsory break, everyone has the opportunity to reorganize and develop new concepts. But no one, neither artists or politicians, can do that for themselves. So exchange ideas, work together, do it together, and support each other. Dear politicians, you need to promote plurality and shouldn't decrease it, because that is what small theaters are all about. Many small theaters that do their own things that cohere all together, but that is prevented by foundings that are linked to conditions, making you control the plurality. By thus, the plurality is no longer plurality. That is why independent theater is to be supported more directly, especially more theaters, and with less conditions, giving them the opportunity to get the needed funding without wasting a lot of time and too much bureaucracy, without competition, without the one with more specialized employees to win, without a selection process. Founding should be designed in a way that it can be firmly included into the financial plan. It should not be a competition, not a game of chance where it is unclear until the end whether you will get the funding at all. At the moment, we have to deal with another crisis next to the climate crisis. And even in the COVID-19 crisis, the small companies of which you don't notice anything else are the ones who are going to feel the crisis the hardest. The ones that needed the most support. But with every company, no matter how small, they have financial existence. Existence that have a right to exist. And it's even more important that they exist. Because the big companies are okay and good, but the majority are still made up of the small companies. And that's where change comes from the base. Change always finds the root in the base below, not in the base with those few companies who have managed to make a big name for themselves.
Time is passing, climate changing. Are you too? Can you not change? The system will change or the system will end. What about you? We will change the system. Keep living, adapting, surviving. Will you too? This is Fridays for Future with system change, not climate change. Thank you.
So first of all, thank you very much for this performance, and thank you very much, Stefan, for the warm introduction and the warm words. Dario, straightforward. How hard is it for you as a climate activist and also a theater lover to see or to realize that theater have been showing almost zero interest in climate change topics or activism over the last couple of years?
I think what we never should ignore is that when we are talking about theater and what theater is doing or what theater is addressing, first of all, there are always exceptions, obviously. And second of all, I think we usually talk about the bigger companies, about the theaters funded by cities and not surviving on their own. So I have had the luck to know people who are who not only are actors for a living, but also act to survive, but not only financially. So they are not part of a big ensemble in a huge theater like we're in here, but they are much nearer to society through the people. They have a lot more dialogue with the people and with what the people think. So I think that the, let's say, the bigger the company of the theater is, the less the theater has the possibility to adapt to what people want on time. And I think that is why we are here, to get to know what others already found out and to get to know what we can do better.
Yeah. So if we take a closer look to the text itself, I think it's a really nuanced observation of the dilemmata in regards to theater and sustainability. So let's imagining the following. If climate change activism is a school and theater a student, how would its timetable look like, and what kind of person would student theater be?
Well, I think that to say it in a very strong way, the timetable would have various topics, like a million ways to die and want to survive. And I think we are here to find this one way to make theater survive within this society and on this planet. And by this, I think we can also only try to imagine what kind of student theater would be. And I think theater would have various personalities, not only standing for its own, but also standing with others, with other students around.
And I think theater should be a very interested student, a very like do the homeworks and stuff like that, to find this one way to survive.
Yeah. One of the very interesting things for me when I think about Fridays for Futures is that it's on the one hand a social movement with straight political claims on the one hand, but also a social unit. I mean, you're gathering, you're mingling, you're working on campaigns, etc. Personally spoken, what did you learn through and with Fridays for Future? And on the other hand, what did you unlearn?
Well, I think I learned mostly to organize stuff, like jumping into the cold water to look up how to do all the stuff with the police and stuff. And well, I think I've learned, I've unlearned a bit to learn, like we learn in school, like the strict plan, how we learn, how we have to learn stuff. I think it was like a bit hard to have like Fridays for Future on the one side and school on the other side, with those completely different structures.
I think the main thing I personally learned was friendship, because to be honest, I didn't have that great of a start when going to school for the first 6 or 7 years. I mean, it became better in the last 2 years before I started to work with Fridays for Future. So until 2018, I did not really have any friends, and I think this changed now in the last 2 years.
And you have like contacts all over Germany, so that's very great. So it doesn't matter on where you went in Germany. So there's in every city, in every place in Germany, you have like this one guy, you know, there, and that's very great. So yeah,
that is one thing I have to fight with emotionally now, especially during this crisis, when I tried to stay at home as much as possible. I live near the train station, and every day I go to school, I pass by this train station, and whenever I see this big blue timetable with the trains and the platforms, whatever city name I can read, I always have to remember this 1 or 2 people I know from there that I didn't know 2 years ago, and that I only know now thanks to Fridays for Future.
So we have one last question, actually. So we'll jump straight to the end. If you could run a theater, how would it look like?
Well, I know the structures of Fridays for Future on a national level and on a local level. And there obviously is problems like wherever you look. But I think one thing that would be very important to me is to watch out that anybody who wants to work and who wants to help has to be given this chance. And I think that to create the possibility for anyone to help, we should not create a new system inside of this theater, obviously, where there are positions of power and positions of less power, because this, yes, this has benefits, but I think there are more, this is more of a problem than it offers benefits.
And I think, well, that so I have now, sometimes I think that they're like the guys on the stage and the public, and they're like different worlds. And I think in my theater, there would be talking to each other, there would be connecting each other, that there's like they're changing ideas and stuff like that. I think that's very important, and that's what especially like the big houses don't have right now.
Sweet. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having us. And see you later. If you have any questions or want to talk to us, I think you will somehow manage to find our email addresses that have been published somewhere. So see you.
Do this. Thank you very much to the young voices that we just have heard. We are apologizing. We have had some technical issues, as you could see this morning. So we have lost our link to the live stream. Now we are going to close the webinar and restart. Those of you in Zoom with us, please follow the link in the auditorium on the platform once more and rejoin us back here for the next speakers in the program. That means most probably that we are going to be 10-15 minutes behind schedule. If you are following along, and so we are very grateful for your understanding and patience with us. See you very, very soon.
I think we can go to the first session, which is entitled Culture and Environmental Sustainability, Perspectives of Policymaking, Science and Research, Culture System Change, and Cross-Sectoral Synergies. Quite a lot of things there that we have on our plate, and we have only 45 minutes for a very interesting panel that will be moderated by Jan-Jaap Knoo from the Boekman Foundation of the Netherlands. So we will have invited them to reflect on the European Green Deal, which is Europe's flagship initiative. And we have asked the experts to explore how culture policy, we now heard just young people bringing in some concrete proposals, but how do you embed a green notion in culture policy? And so this will be the topic of the next or the first session of this panel. I'm not going to waste more time. I hand with pleasure the word to Jan-Jaap.
Hello, everybody. Welcome in this session. We just heard some very strong messages from two young ones. I don't know if everybody who is listening now also heard them speak, but they had a strong message, and they actually said concerning the climate crisis, the system will change or it will end. So that is quite a strong question that we are going to face in the next 45 minutes with three guests that you will hear. Each of our guests will do a short statement of 5 minutes, then I will ask one or two questions, but not too many, since we want to have time also for a conversation between the three of our speakers at the second phase of our session. I will briefly introduce the three speakers of today to you, and they will all in their own way reflect on the question how cultural policy should change if we want to overcome the big challenge that climate change is putting to us. And one of the first, is Alison Tickle. Alison, you are a director of Julie's Bicycle. I read at your website that actually you started this organization of you in 2006 by riding your bicycle, not your car, by riding your bicycle to a meeting in London. Well, you will have more time afterwards, but can you in one or two sentences introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you so much, Jan, and everybody for being here. I'm Alison Tickell. I founded Julie's Bicycle. Actually, we started officially in 2007, really focused on what the role of culture was in meeting this climate crisis and what it needed to look like in a very practical as well as a creative and conceptual way.
We come back to that later. Our second guest is Sebastian Bruner. You are from Germany, working at the Kulturstiftung des Bundes, when I say it in German, but you can say it in English. Please introduce.
Yes, hi, my name is Sebastian Brunger. I work for the German Federal Culture Foundation, which is a funding institution that promotes art and culture within the scope of federal competence. And I am the project coordinator of the funding program Doppelpass, Theater Cooperation Fund. And I'm part of a team that is developing new funding approaches, such as recently a new theater funding program, Jupiter, Theater for Young Audiences, or right now a new project that supports carbon footprinting in cultural institutions.
And we'll also hear more from you after Alison has spoken. And from Germany, we move to Greece. We have Christos Karas in our middle. You are director of the Onassis Cultural Center in Athens. On your website, I found a very intriguing text that your center is a space where art, aesthetics, and science meet. Can you elaborate one or two sentences on that before I give the floor to Alison?
Yes, of course. Good morning, everyone. Onassis Dei, which is a division of the Onassis Foundation here in Athens, is indeed a transdisciplinary arts center. So it's not a theater, it's not a concert hall, it's not an exhibition space, but it's all of that at once. And it's especially a space in which we try and find connections between not only the art forms across the spectrum, but also their relationship to society and the critical issues that society is facing today. So that's why we put the emphasis very much on the way we connect to various aspects of our world.
Okay, thank you for that. Well, I think it's time to move on to the statements. I mentioned already the two young people, the two young theater actors from Düsseldorf we listened to, and they said it's about something bigger, this issue, than just saving printing paper. I think, Alison, you will agree with them, but I invite you to share some more thoughts with us on cultural sector and climate change. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Jan, and I'm very glad to be here on this particular Thursday morning and to share with you and my fellow panelists some good experiences of positive climate action in culture and in theatre. Since the weekend, I feel much less dismal as a consequence of what happened in the United States, as I'm sure you do too. Partly because it speaks to a point that is very relevant and we've already heard about this morning, that the climate and ecological emergency needs all of us to work quickly, collaboratively, and with an absolute focus. There is no time to lose. We know that this pandemic has shockingly accelerated an inevitable great reckoning with our deeply broken economic systems, which are in turn breaking our planetary systems. We've already heard about this morning. And getting to grips with this emergency, understanding how theatres can implement radical change is frankly impossible to do, maintaining business as usual. So the rethinking is now an imperative. Julie's Bicycle is a company I started 13 years ago, which has been exploring this intersection between culture and climate since we started. And most of that focus has been very practical. It's founded on two central ideas. One is that the climate crisis is in actual fact a cultural crisis, a crisis of values and a crisis of what we care for, and two, that we cannot wait for the existing system, the status quo, to sort this out for us, because it can't. It brought us here. We've got to change the system, and that means a step change in cultural policy, investment, training and tools. We need a unifying and mobilizing international approach that embeds sustainability and justice into the fabric of theatre. So what might this look like? We have all the key frameworks in which national and international targets sit. There is the Paris Climate Agreement, the Sustainable Development Goals, the circular economy, emerging biodiversity and nature frameworks, and of course, the Green Deal. These together represent, I think, four key themes. There is decarbonisation, the immediate, rapid and urgent reduction in greenhouse gas emissions to net zero. Circularity, a waste-free economy that moves away from excessive consumption of finite resources. Three, there is nature, restoring, protecting biodiversity and natural heritage. And four, justice. And this last is perhaps the most important, because I have come in my 13 years of working in this space to realize that without justice, we are lost. The origins of the climate and ecological crisis are in large part founded on the prevailing attitude of human supremacy, celebrated too often in culture over other forms of life, which has fostered an enduringly uneven global growth model, which has dispossessed millions of people of land, livelihoods, and degraded the natural world. So the story of climate change isn't found in the ice caps. It lies in the buried histories of human conquest, anchored in cultural values that celebrate the idea of human supremacy. This is why the climate crisis is a cultural crisis. So where does policy sit in all this? Well, policy reflects our civic values, and it is the tool of power that strengthens them, and therein lies the opportunity. So Julie's Bicycle has been deeply involved in policy since 2010, recognizing that systems approach, that we need to work with the system. Modeling London's theatre, music and visual arts sectors early in 2010 with the city's climate policy. And since then, we've consistently worked with cities, with organisations and with creative sectors on policy framing, most notably with our Arts Council work, which in England in 2012 embarked upon the largest programme of environmental literacy for culture anywhere in the world, making environmental requirements a funding requirement. That really changed the game. Over 800 arts companies have had to measure environmental impacts using our culturally specific carbon calculators and have an active environmental policy. This decade of data gathering and collective learning has generated invaluable data, but more importantly, cultural transformation, and cultural transformation which aligns very nicely with the Green Deal. Together with many people, including Christoph, who you've met, Ben, Ifeyenya, we've co-created the largest sustainable cultural resource library anywhere in the world, and it's all free. You're welcome to it if you go onto the website. And during this time, a new ecology of creative climate practice has been emerging all over the world, and many of you might recognize yourselves in this framework. They all map across to the European Green Deal, but I just wanted to very quickly finish on just naming them. There are 5 key areas of activity operating on 2 new working principles that need to be enshrined in policy. They cherish our planet. These 2 are collaboration, which is superseding competition, and pathfinding, which is superseding the status quo. We see this new creative ecology in 1, artwork, curation, exhibitions. 2, our people, our campaigns, our activists, new cultural activists speaking to their truths. 3, organizations and organizational leadership. Our organizations embody our values. There's such a huge opportunity for theatre to cohabit leadership, collaborating on change. 4, our makers, our social and material designers and our innovators. And 5, our influencers, our policymakers and our funders. Here's the reality check. 2020 is set to be the warmest year on record, and we are in the midst of a catastrophic extinction event. But we know we can do this. Emissions dropped by a staggering 8% this year, and that is phenomenal. The reasons for that are extremely dysfunctional. We need to choose change, not wait for it to happen upon us. Everywhere, renewal is bubbling up and gathering momentum. And in this movement of change, everything matters. All the small actions and the connections speaking to cultural values that cherish and care. Theatre has a long history of activating social and more recently environmental change, but it is nowhere near enough. This year, in the run-up to the next climate talks, the most important climate talks that we've ever had, and it is our last chance, next year in Glasgow, the COP26 talks, we have a once in a generation opportunity to transform a creative economy that is no longer fit for purpose into an ecology that is equitable, collaborative, resilient, and restorative. It is critical that policy meets that challenge.
Thank you so much for that. So now you see me again. Yeah, thank you. Alison, you've also listened to the young ones, the two actors from Germany, and it was striking that they also emphasized this importance of cooperation. But they also called for more attention for the small cultural initiatives, because it might be much more easier for big houses to deal with this issue. Or do you think it's the other way around, that we need the small initiatives particularly?
So very often we found that smaller companies, smaller operations are much more adventurous in what they do. It's partly the structure, they can make decisions much faster. They're generally a little bit more experimental, a bit more, you find more innovation there. So there's a lot to learn from big institutions, that a lot of new ideas are being trailblazed by smaller companies. Bigger organizations can do some of the structural shifts faster, and that means that they can also take more risk. So I wouldn't split this up. I think this is incredibly important that we locate ourselves wherever or whoever we are in this new ecology, creative ecology. We recognize, and this is where policy becomes very important, we recognize where our agency lies, and we work out what we can do directly and what we need around us, what our influence might be. So I think it's really important at the moment that we recognize agency and ambition everywhere we are in the creative community. We don't wait for anybody else to do this for us.
Okay, thank you. I think we move on to Sebastian, and then later on we'll come back to you as well, Alison. Sebastian Bruner, you are from the Bundesstiftung Germany. You are a funding organization. So I'm very curious, since funding is often so important for cultural organizations, how you look at the role of an organization like yours in addressing the issue we have at stake today. Please, Sebastian, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation to be with you here today. I would like to focus exactly on this, well, particularly on greenhouse gas emissions and cultural policy. And well, you talked already about the challenges of climate change and political goals, and you mentioned the Green New Deal. Let me add, from a German perspective, Germany's goal is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 55% by 2030 compared to 1990 levels. And these goals, of course, can only be achieved, as Alison also said, if they are understood as a task for society as a whole. And this transformation process has to happen in the cultural sector too. So it's not only a matter of art itself to creatively shape this transformation process and to make the dramatic changes tangible and tellable in a way through art, but it's also a matter of the production of art and the carbon footprint of art. And at least in Germany, in the cultural landscape so far, I think we lack a broad knowledge and experience in order to implement specific cross-sectoral approaches. something that Alison already called environmental or carbon literacy. And but we also lack tools and guidelines in the cultural sector. And this is where policy making comes into play. And even though the German Federal Culture Foundation is not a policymaker, a classic policymaker, we are not part of the federal government. Of course, we aim to have an impact with our funding programs and with our funding guidelines. And we try to set examples and promote possible role models in order to initiate and support transformation within cultural institutions. But how do we do that? We're not simply imposing prohibitions, neither we believe in plain voluntary commitment. We go something like a middle way. We try to develop funding programs that do imply restrictions, but we do it together with artists and cultural institutions. And we provide platforms in order to do so. So let me give you an example. Last year, within the program I manage, within the theater program Doppelpass, we had a gathering of 150 theater makers, and we discussed questions like, how can we work internationally and ecologically in times of climate change? What kind of funding would be technically possible and artistically interesting? How about climate justice in the cultural sector? And none the least, does artistic freedom and ecological sustainability fit together? Back then, last year, the majority of participants said quite clearly, we want more rules, we want strict guidelines, and only few participants saw this as an inappropriate intervention into artistic freedom. Well, that was last year, before Corona. However, as a reaction to these discussions, this year, we set up a pilot project that supports 20 cultural institutions in carbon footprinting and reducing their carbon footprints. And participants are museums, libraries, concert halls, theaters, also theaters which are among us, like Staatsschauspiel Dresden, Schaubühne Berlin, Musanturm, Kampnagel, Staatstheater Darmstadt. And we want to set an example in Germany, and we want to learn with the institutions. What are the insights when you do carbon footprinting? How hard can it be? And what are the possibilities to reduce the footprints? And one of the consequences of this pilot project could be for us next year, exactly linking the distribution of funds to aspects of ecological sustainability. Thus, eventually some or eventually all projects funded by the foundation would have to meet the requirement of carbon footprinting and develop specific goals to reduce the footprint. This is quite similar to the approach of the Arts Council and Julie's Bicycle, though it is more complicated in Germany because of its federal structure, and the foundation does only provide project funding. And now there's Corona, but I'm deeply convinced that we have to tackle the issue despite Corona, or particularly because of Corona. Thank you.
Thank you. You seek in Germany a kind of middle way, as you describe, and not so much impose restrictions on the cultural sector, but by way of talking with the cultural sector, see in how you can make together progress when it comes to address the issues of sustainability. But having heard Alison's talk, and she had a quite an urgent message. Do you think that is enough? Shouldn't we be more strict and do more in terms of conditions for subsidies, in terms of norms or accountability of cultural institutions? Can you elaborate a bit more on that?
Yeah, I wish we would. Well, I wish we could be more bold in this sense. But I also think that cultural institutions are facing so many challenges. It's not only ecological and environmental issues, it's hierarchies, it's power, it's Me Too, it's diversity, the digital issues. And so there are so many topics, and we have to somehow, well, at least our understanding is to give an example and to have a group that can set an example and somehow lead a way we don't believe that we have to lecture all those institutions how to perform their change. And so also focusing on the part of the dialogue again, I think it's crucially important that in this sense, artists and culture institutions get involved in the dialogue with policymakers as well, because change is going to happen anyways. And it's simply an open question how, for example, Harald Welzer puts it, whether it will be changed by design or changed by disaster. And we still have the opportunity to shape or at least influence the conditions of artistic work in Germany. And I encourage artists and cultural institutions in Germany very much, but also on an international level, to get involved, because it's not only a matter of money, it's a matter of ideas. And so if you have an idea, step forward. Yeah. We have to do this together.
And in that sense, Alison, she gives culture a unique position in this discussion. She actually says it's not only a climate change that we have to face, but to face that climate change, we need cultural change. So she strongly stresses this unique position of culture. Do you agree with her that culture has a indeed unique position in this discussion, that is not the same as, well, let's say the sports or the world of other industry? Or
I agree. I totally agree. Because like from a scientific point of view, they always say we put out the facts, but culture can make it tellable, tangible. And so the role of art is very important, and the role of cultural institutions is very important, because from a self perspective and self-understanding, especially from theaters, they understand their role in society in the middle of this transformation process, to initiate and to initiate change and to be critical. So, but my point would be, it's not the art itself, it has to be the way how the production of art itself as well. Not just to basically preach it on stages and in exhibitions, but also to live it themselves.
Okay, thank you. I'll come back to you later, but we move on to Christos, to Athens, where Christos Karas is director of the Onassis Cultural Center. A big house in terms of theater organizations, I think. So I'm also curious, Christos, when you will talk, how you see the difference between big theater houses and the smaller ones. But please take the floor and let us know how you, as executive director of a big cultural organization, are working on sustainability.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation. We've been working for about 3 years now in collaboration with Julie's Bicycle, hi Alison, and to improve overall our performance at the level of culture, of sustainability, and our output, our impact on the environment, and in other levels as well. I think it's important to say that the only way to approach this is in a sort of holistic way. You can't work at one level and not at all the others. So we were discussing earlier about whether, you know, attitudes and mentalities and perceptions have to shift first, or whether we have to do other more structural things. And I think it goes both ways. These things have to happen simultaneously. It's like a widening of the circle of awareness as we go. And the thing is that dominant perceptions and public perceptions are quite volatile. At the beginning of the Corona crisis, in Europe, everyone suddenly discovered the beauty of lower emissions and everything. As time goes on, we read reports about people planning to travel more after the crisis. So, you know, perception and public attitude is volatile, and you need to somehow fix the framework in policy and in your internal procedures in order to both maintain, let's say, the discussion going and actually make a practical difference. So I think it's in Europe, speaking of Europe now, it's a great moment with this new Green Deal that sets this kind of framework. I think in the cultural sector, I think many of us are active in programs like Creative Europe or Erasmus Plus, or maybe even Horizon Europe. I think it will be very important that this, and I'm sure it's the case, that these green policies will be reflected in the funding and in the priorities that will be expressed through these programs of the European Union. The same goes for each state on its own, and of course there's a very wide discrepancy here. But again, there has to be a lobbying on the part of society and of the cultural sector for a more inventive, let's say, incentives and policies at a state level. However, we're talking about what we can do, and here as well, what we can do is actually integrate policies and practices in our everyday work, and this is what we have to do. And in this respect, it's sometimes easier for a larger organization to do this than a smaller one, because they have possibility of measuring, of controlling, of assessing, of monitoring. On the other hand, smaller organizations can make a very quick impact on what they do. And I'm talking about things, speaking from a larger organization, structural things like integrating green responsibilities into job titles and job descriptions, setting performance indicators of various kinds that are related to environmental performance, making the procurement policy equally dependent on issues of environment as on just cost, working on the F&B outlets that we will have, making sure that they also follow, working on reducing our footprint, both in energy and printing and waste and water use. I mean, these are things that you have to integrate into your structure and make it known outside as well to the public, in order to show that things can be done and that this is a real issue on which you're taking action. So coming to a third level, I think what's important is that we realize to what degree we have communication power, to use Manuel Castell's terms, especially these days when all cultural organizations are basically becoming broadcasters. That's what we do. We broadcast content, unfortunately, for the moment. Therefore, in a sense, we're like media organizations in a way, and we have to use this media power, this media presence, for the purpose of also getting out the sustainability message, which we can only credibly do if it's part of the way we work. And at the fourth and last level, the most obvious one is how to, Sebastian said this nicely, how to make this tangible through narratives, through stories, through experiences that our audiences have, hopefully in the future in our physical spaces as well. But this is a very important thing, but they go together. We have to change our system. The system supports the attitudes and the awareness. This feeds back into the system and so on. So it's not a question of prior. All this has to be done at the same time. Thank you.
Okay. All of this has to be done at the same time. It sounds so good, and yet so difficult. Everything has to be done at the same time. If you would be in charge of the European policy for the moment, what would be your first step?
If I were in charge of the European policy, I have to be very, very careful, because I think Barbara Gessler is on the guest list. I saw her, so I have to be very careful what I say. Well, I think that definitely green policies, sustainability issues should be a part of the assessment of applications. And I think that just as there was a strand in the past for mobility, there has to be a strand now for environmental sustainability of practice. And since we mentioned mobility, this is, I think, a very complex and crucial issue, because one of the whole points of the European support for culture is to create intra-Europe mobility of cultural actors and works, and it would be terrible to lose that. We all understand that there's a contradiction there with environmental issues. This is a very difficult conundrum, and it's made even more difficult because of the regional differences. It's very different being in Germany, Switzerland, France, or the Netherlands to tour your production by train, and it's very different if you're in Bulgaria, Greece, or Malta to Cyprus to tour by train or in sustainable ways. So there's a lot of work to be done there in preserving the vision of a trans-European cultural sector and building in environmental sustainability. So it's a very, very complex issue.
Thank you. I want to bring you all back in the discussion, also Sebastian and Alison, to have more a conversation between the three of you. And my first point would be that we have heard Christos talking about this need to in change of perception, a holistic approach. He actually concluded. Sebastian noticed that there is still so much lack of knowledge. Alison, you talked about carbon literacy. Let me first start with this this point of is there a lack of knowledge, or don't we want to see what is actually happening to the climate? Also, we as people working in the theater sector, Alison, do you think there is enough awareness that this is really an urgent thing?
The short answer to that is definitely no. And Christoph, I really appreciate what you said about this need to act simultaneously. That so to speak directly to your question, Jan, I think there is a lack of knowledge. I think that this feels very overwhelming. You know, what we've done is to be bombarded by very big statistics that actually don't really feel like they belong to us, even though we are witnessing it bodily in our bodies, some of the anxiety, some of the grief, some of the loss. We see it around us, we see some of the inequity. But the frameworks for that really are quite technocratic. They're very often political. Climate change has been politicized, which is terrible. And so therefore it feels that we don't really have a purchase over them. The first thing to say is that the more we know about climate change as individuals as well as sectors, the more urgent it becomes. So this is not a particularly easy journey to go on. And you realize very quickly on that pathway that actually this is the only thing that really matters. It's a very generous agenda because it reaches into everything that we do, all the decisions we make. But it is a very generous and a very regenerative agenda once you're actually on that journey. But it's not easy. And the most important thing is actually how you translate these really big stories, these really big statistics, these really big frameworks into your everyday thinking and doing. And although it's not easy, it is very, very exciting, incredibly inspirational. It's an amazing opportunity to really think about ourselves in relation to one another and to the world. So, but we need to know so much more. We have got nothing like enough urgency or speed to bring to
what makes it so inspirational? Do you have an example you would like to mention that really shows that it can be very inspiring, actually, that it can be fun to do work on environmental sustainability?
Yeah, so I'll talk about me first. I have had such a great time over the last 13 years meeting some of the best people in the world who are really engaged with this. I have been so blessed to be doing this work. Some of them are on this call now. So that's the first thing, and that's been deeply fulfilling. But on a broader level, the opportunity this gives us for creative rejuvenation and regeneration with a deeply ethical, moral, shared purpose to come together in community, to rethink who we are in relation to this absolutely wonderful planet we live on, and in relation to one another and our communities, is the most exciting creative challenge that any of us could ever have. So the short answer is, what an amazing opportunity we've got.
That is a great pitch. who is not convinced by that, you would say, but Christos, you have a question nevertheless.
Well, not a question. I'd like to add something to what Alison said about our experience within our organization here. You know, a lot of people feel that a lot of people are aware of the climate crisis, but they're afraid they can't do anything about it. So within an organization like us, creating a green team which works across all the departments and reaching out to all the staff members and getting them engaged in actually doing practical things in their everyday work life has, I think, really energized people, because they suddenly realize that they can make a difference in the way they work and the way they run their lives generally. So I think that's also you know, a form of engagement that's important to support.
Okay, Sebastian, representing a funding organization that, as far as I know, is also engaged in international work, not only project funding in Germany itself. How do you look to the questions about mobility? Since over the past years, we have stimulated so much mobility between artists, between students, and like Christos also pictured out, there are dilemmas, of course. And returning again to the two young actors we've heard, they had a plea for being local active in culture. Your sound, Sebastian.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. Totally. I think that's the most difficult issue, actually, the mobility part. And as a culture foundation, this is basically aiming at the core of our foundation as well, because we support international work and we want to continue to support international work. And so how is that possible in times of climate change? And as Christos already said, I think there is not a general answer for everybody, because it makes a huge difference where you live and where you want to show your pieces and where you want to work. And it's also a big question of climate justice. For European artists, it is a privilege that they've been able to travel for the last 40 years, and now they maybe do it a little bit less, but other artists from all over the world, they need this mobility. So I don't have a simple answer to that, but I'm pretty hopeful, at least from our discussions, that there are also artistic solutions to that, to think about, is this, as Alison pointed out, as a chance to think of artistic solutions and productions that might also kind of reshape the way of how you don't need to travel for artistic work anymore, or at least also at the time of curation. When you put together your festival program, there's been so much talk about how you can actually travel less and still make a good program. So I think we come back to the point of exchange, to stay in dialogue, and from a policy point of view, well, to support, first of all, to support these ideas. And at least for us, again, it's the way of thinking of setting examples and to promote role models, how to do it. That would be actually our understanding, to really promote good ways of working together.
Yeah, but you wouldn't go so far as a funder, or do you think that other funders should go that far, that they forbid flying with subsidy money, for example?
Well, of course, that's a discussion. Maybe not flying in total, but for sure, short-haul flights or national flights, that could be a question. But again, that could work maybe for Germany, but how about Cyprus? that doesn't work. So I think it has to be specific solutions then in the realm of the scope of your policy.
Christos, do you think that would work for Greece? Not Cyprus, but Greece, no flying.
I don't think the solution is to have a complete ban on flying. It wouldn't work easily for Greece. It's very difficult to tour a production from Greece by train. I think what we need to do is to really eliminate any non-essential flying. I mean, I think we've all learned from this experience that really you don't need to get up from Athens and fly to Copenhagen for a 2-hour meeting, right? That's something which we might have done a year ago, I might have done it stupidly, but I won't do it again. That's for sure, because I've learned I can do very well without it. And as Sebastian said, the whole curating process can be improved. So I think, it would be a real shame if we can't keep this exchange of cultural production going through Europe. I think it's a super important part of what Europe is and what Europe could be. So I wouldn't go as far as saying that we can say no flying, but I think we have to prompt governments to develop infrastructures that make flying less necessary. And I think as responsible professionals, we have to really not fly unless there really is no other way to get a result.
Okay, thank you. And we have 5 minutes left for this session. So we have to use our time. I've seen your hand, Alison, and I will give all the three of you the opportunity for a short message, if that's okay. I have one question from the chat that I want to address specifically, since we have little time for audience participation, but now we have a question that is a question to Sebastian, actually. And it's from Stefan Berman, and he asks, you mentioned some examples, but they were all from bigger venues. And he asked, is it more difficult for smaller structures to join your program?
So here I am. I guess this question regards the pilot project that we are doing right now. And these are basically rather big venues, that's true, because we wanted to really, well, tackle the big structures. But for sure, as also Alison and Christos said, eventually it has to be all of the venues as well. That's for sure.
Okay, thank you. Well, Alison, you are invited to make your concluding statement, if you like.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to quickly pick up on the travel, touring, flight thing. First of all, there are mechanisms. For example, if we have carbon budgets, we can make choices around traveling, around what we actually spend our environmental bill on. So there are ways where you can keep choices going, you can keep traveling, but you actually work within limits, which speaks to my my final concluding point, which is that really it was made by Christos, that what we do in a very intimate way actually needs to reflect what our policy is going to do, that we need to bring together intimate, small, organizational or personal policy and values and meet the bigger frameworks across them. And that really does mean that we have to very rapidly accelerate the knowledge sharing that we already have. There was a point that was made by the Fridays for Future team around disclosure, about really being very open about what we do. And above all, the biggest thing to say is really collaboration. Let's work together, let's strengthen one another, let's come together and meet this challenge together. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Sebastian, to conclude?
Yeah, I would like to take the opportunity here to actually tell a wish. I think because it's important to address European policymakers and European funding institutions as well. And I wish we could continue this kind of exchange on a policymaking level and to come together and further explore the question, how can we link the distribution of funds to aspects of ecological sustainability? Not every country and not every county has to invent the wheel entirely new. And I think we have to share the experiences and knowledge, because in the end, at best, there should be some kind of comparability or standard if you are an artist and you are applying for funds at different places. For example, you're applying for a fund at the EU level and at the German Culture Foundation, and we all ask for environmental policies or carbon footprints. These requirements should not be entirely different. And that would be great if we can pick up this thought and follow it up.
Okay, thank you for that. Christos, you have the final word.
Well, the final word, I'd just like to say, because I think many colleagues might be sort of a bit scared organizationally of embarking on something like this. And what I'd like to say in closing is that it's been, and it still is, a great experience organizationally. It's done a lot of good to the organization to work together for something that's so obviously good and uncontentious as climate crisis. So I would recommend, over and above the benefit to the universe, for the organization, it's a good experience as well.
Okay, thank you. And then we are back at the inspiration that Alison also pictured to us. I thank you all for your very clear, concise statements. I can say to the audience that in the next session, we will go deeper into the theater practice. We will discuss then how the theater organizations, the performing arts world, can really embed sustainability in its organization. Thank you again. And this day has the title Making Progress. Today is the second day of the European Theatre Forum. It is about making progress. Well, progress you can only make by setting small steps. I hope this discussion added a few small steps to this big challenge that is before us. And thank you all again, and see you later, hopefully during this European Theatre Forum. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Jan-Jaap Knoll, for this very dense session. We'll announce a short break of 10 minutes now. The Zoom webinar will remain open during the break, and then we'll go on with the second session that has just been described. So see you later.
Hello, good morning, everyone. I hope you can see me and hear me. Yeah. So this is the second session of today's program. Many thanks to the previous panelists. They gave us a great lead into the discussion of this second session. Our focus is on embedding environmental sustainability in the theatre and performing arts sector. And we will be discussing whether and how theatre and the performing arts can be agents of change in the context of the climate emergency, of course, and what role the sector could play towards a fair green transition. And furthermore, to what degree might this transition affect artistic creation itself, or the way cultural organizations have been operating so far. In short, we want to discuss whether we are faced with a challenge or whether we should look at it as an opportunity. So for this second panel discussion, we are very happy to be joined today by artist, writer, and theatre maker Benjamin Verdonk. I'm not sure if we can see everybody. Good morning, Benjamin. Also joined by Nathalie Dreemeyer, who is a dramaturg and curator, and she has brought to the forefront a wave of contemporary theatrical creation connected to climate change. Can we, is Nathalie here?
Hello.
Hello, hi.
I'm part of it, yes.
Thank you. Eva Johansson, a cultural journalist with a background in environmental studies, who is currently in charge of the project Art Climate Transition at the New Theatre Institute in Riga. Eva, are you with us?
Hi.
Hi. And finally, Ben Twist, Director of Creative Carbon Scotland. who brings with him a wealth of experience in methodologies and policies of embedding sustainability in culture. We have chosen to open this panel discussion not with a keynote speech, but so to speak, with a keynote performance. And this will be Carousel by Benjamin Verdonk. Just a few words to contextualize. Carousel is part of a collection of small new works by Benjamin Verdonk that he is currently showing during his 1-year-long world tour of his city, Antwerp. Carousel is a work intended to be presented at any time and at any place. It's yet another step in Benjamin Verdonk's exploration of fluid theatre forms that evade the tension between making and showing, between local and international. So Benjamin, the floor is to you.
I see it in counter. Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay. So it goes like this. And then you can go the other way around. Well, that was it. That was a work. I don't know if it was visible.
It was visible, I think, to everybody. Thank you very much. And of course, well, there are two things that I want to point out in connection to this work. On one hand, the simplicity and the minimalism of materials.
Mm.
And on the other hand, I think what the Carousel brings is this idea perhaps of localized mobility, which maybe also is reflected in your world tour inside your own city. So could you expand a little bit? It's of course, it's not the first work of art in this concept. You have been working in this line of thought for many, many years. Can you elaborate a little bit?
Yes. So while I was thinking about what I wanted to say, that I think the first thing I wanted to say is that all of my work starts from an enthusiasm towards the work. So it's not only that it's like that it's directed by meanings. It starts out of enthusiasm about what you want to do. So that's like one part of the work, what you like to do, and then the other part, of course, is like the need, something external which makes you think you have to make this kind of work. And there, for some years already, I'm making. My work is becoming smaller, not only in a proportion and in the use of materials, but also in the as you mentioned, the kind of you could call it simplicity, but let's say like smaller in not spectacular anymore. It's trying to be like a small gesture rather than a bigger one. And I think the main sentence which leads me through for some years already, which leads me, it's like I had a talk, it's already I think 10 years ago, with a philosopher in Berlin, and we were talking about environment and about catastrophe and things like that. And then at the end of the talk, the last question I asked him, and it was already late at night, it was like, what more you think there is to do? And this man, he answered to me, to withdraw gracefully. And this really meant a lot to me. And I think on the this withdrawal is of course very readable in what we as especially Western people have to do if we think about fair practices, if we think about justice, climate justice, social justice. We have too much. This is clear, but also this word gracefully, in grace. It meant something to me as a metaphor into my art practice as well. Like what could be like a gracious way to become smaller. I don't know if this is as an explanation enough. Like this is like for me a starting point. It's something which I carry with me for a long time, and so for the last years, my work really becomes smaller because I really feel the urge to be as flexible as possible towards theater structures. Let's say to the way you are programmed, that you can very quickly respond to a certain on a certain moment, that you don't have to be how should I say that you don't have to be asked 1 year or 2 years in advance to make sure that you can play there, etc. Like this kind of structures we know. But so I'm very much working on this very at the moment programming. So this makes it possible also that I can react on things that are happening and that I really like, and that I can through my work engage myself. And this is something that I think is very important. So let's say I really like the things I make, and this is the thing I want to do. And when there is, for instance, like an Extinction Rebellion action, then I'm always asking myself, instead of going there as a citizen and taking part of this action, is it possible to take part through my work, to engage through my work? And so since I have very small work, I have the possibility to take it with me towards this kind of action, and in this way contribute to this action with my work. And this is the thing I'm looking for. And now
Benjamin, sorry.
No.
Along the same lines that you were talking about your work, since this first part of the discussion will hopefully focus more profoundly on creative responses to the idea of sustainability and to the urgency of climate change, besides your personal expression through your work, is this at the same time a comment on how theater making should perhaps reconsider itself in general?
Yes, yes, for sure, and not only a comment. It is much more than that. It is like an exercise, an attempt on showing or looking together with. So what could be different strategies in dealing with this with this necessary change, for sure. So, for instance, I refused to fly for some years already, and I have the luck that that I was asked quite often to go internationally. So if I go internationally, then I do it by train, which means that it costs a lot more money. So there are a lot of, and so what I do is I make calculations of why it costs more money, why I have to do it this or that way, and then I publish these calculations. So for me, the most important thing is that you are in the possibility to politicize your choices. So in this way, I try not only to comment, but I try to look for other ways of touring, other ways of making things. And so I like to define it that it's not only through my work, but it's also the practice around the way you deal with things, the way you make things, the materials you use, the way you pay the people that work with you, what you eat, the way you travel, why you accept an invitation and why you don't accept another one. That all these things that they are told, that they make part of the story together with the work. So the work that you just saw is the materialization of this work, but there is a big idea around it, and this idea has to be told as well. And this is the politicization of the work, and this is the most important step. And this is not a comment; it is an attempt, a way, an exercise in taking steps forward to what we think is possible, necessary.
We will come back later to this discussion, because in the second part of our conversation, I would like us to focus on the resistance, because the creative process is a more personal affair, and you have much more control on it. But once you begin to look into the practice or the system that supports the practice, then of course that doesn't depend entirely on you. So this is where we face some kind of resistance from the practices that are already in place. So I would like us to come back to this discussion. But for the moment, I still want to focus on the creative responses. In your case, the narrative and the practice coincide. So the artwork and your footprint as an artist is in a holistic way sustainable, so to speak. But I would like to move now also briefly to Natalie, again to ask her. Of course, you know the work of Benjamin Verdonk, and you have been working with artists that are trying to tackle the urgent question of climate change through their creative means. Do you think, Natalie, that this is a trend, or is it a necessity that comes out of the point where we are now in time?
Hello, I would like to thank for the invitation and happy to talk to everyone. So I think it is a necessity. So, but in some theaters, it's a trend. That's the problem. I think if you don't really get really deep to work really deep on the topic, but I would like to tell you, I worked a lot with scientists, for example, since 10 years. That's very important, I think, to collaborate with the science. For example, the first time with the festival Odyssey Climate, which I made 7 years ago. And after that, I made a World Climate Theater research trip and found out that the more countries are affected by the consequences of climate change, the more the theme is treated on stage. That was very interesting. So in Europe, it was not such a lot like in other parts of the world. So in some parts, like in Southeast Asia or South America, it's one of the most important topics in the theater plays. And very often the climate plays are based on real conflicts, which are very often combined with fiction. So, sorry, I don't see you. I had an example for the Little Theater on the Philippines. They stages the experience of those who have become speechless, fallen silent in their production imagination. The group deals with the question of how a society can redefine itself after a catastrophe. It was created after the Typhoon Haiyan, which has this huge power because of the heat of the sea. So, and there's another possibility, the PETA, the Philippine Educational Theatre Association, works with survivors by helping them to break through the physical and psychological bonds of their collective, but individual experience trauma by means of anti-trauma workshops, which were guided by psychologists and theater makers. And many theater groups form a lobby with their audience so as to draw attention and to jointly demand their rights from political. And I really like that during my research, I really found that the language of theater links people worldwide. So it was really nice to see how many theater people worldwide are working on this topic. And yeah, we had the chance to work together. I was adapted dramaturg for the time I was in Indonesia and the Philippines, for example. I was created or asked to create a performance for the conference of the Global NDC conference of the 350 representatives of the country who signed the Paris Climate Agreement. They were invited in Berlin, and with people, we created the Climate Pop-Up Theater, and performers and authors from Asia, Africa, Australia, America, Europe were involved, and the people were all based in Berlin or were invited by other cultural institutions for the moment. And the audience was invited to reflect on their roles in creating these futures and the narratives needed to tackle with the climate crisis. I would like to read a part which Shana Tabasi, knowledge manager and specialist from the UNFCCC Climate Technology Center, network of the UN city in Copenhagen, wrote about the climate theater. I remember the Climate Pop-Up Theater very fondly. After a conference day where everyone was busy discussing technical details on how to solve the climate crisis, it was like a breath of fresh air to be reminded of the humanity behind it all. Climate change is not only the topic of a policy document. Climate change impacts women, boys, men, girls, and other humans on this planet in cross-cutting ways. The theater created a personal setting where the global audience could get lost in dance, poetry, and song to connect the memories of the past and the future and remind us of why we were there. So this was very important for me in the beginning of the work I've done in this context. I had the impression, okay, I'm asking always the scientists to being part of my project, but I had so many discussions or talks with scientists, and they said, okay, it's so important for us to work together with the artists, with the theater people, for example, because the problem of the climate change or climate crisis seems to be so difficult to understand and to describe, and because the principles of cause and effect is not really understandable. It's a really big complexity, and it needs or there's a desire for visualization, for concretization, and actually yeah, to work together. So and in my opinion, it's very important to create this kind of utopias as a positive counter design.
So do you think from your experience, do you get the feeling that when culture and science work complementary, is this a shortcut towards the necessary change, system change, awareness?
I think it's one possibility to work together. So I think it's important that a lot of people know everything, nearly everything about the climate change. So it's not possible to understand, as I said, the whole complex system. But I think we need now a new way to touch the people, to reach the people in an emotional way. This is the most important thing, because you can understand what happens, but when you are emotionally touched, then it makes something else with your body, with the people, with the audience. So it's getting deeper than only the information about the climate crisis and what happened worldwide. So, for example, the coronavirus, I was really surprised how fast something happened. So it's really like, okay, now no, there are only few flights, the shops are empty, the streets are empty. So we feel that we are part of the nature, part of the our body is part of the nature. So we were really in danger, and that's why we changed everything. The capitalistic system changed, and I was really surprised that it was possible so fast. So the people from the South countries, for example, they feel it now, and it's a part of very dangerous things. So it's a question of life or death sometimes. They lose their homes and everything. So yeah, I think it should be more connected, the knowledge of the scientists and the activists as well, to work together. So it's not only the theater people making some project about it, but it's really a collaboration network. Alison told it before, it's really important to not making a challenge of it, but to work together with their scientists, their activists, the audience, the people working in theater. And that's why I created, for example, a working group at the theater where I'm working at the moment, the Hans Otto Theater in Potsdam, to invite all of these people to work together and to create something new. Beside the, okay, we are making this kind of demonstration, we are publishing this kind of articles, and we are making our theater projection. I think this is the most important thing, to collaborate worldwide. And yeah, with all the people who are working on this topic in your country and in the countries of the world.
So it's quite interesting to see that there is a wave, not a trend. I would not say that, although sometimes, as you said, it might look like it's a response to a trend. But at the same time, you can see that there is a wave of artists and creative responses across the world that make us feel that theater has a more essential, profound role to play in this transition towards what we hope will be a more sustainable future. And I want to move to Eva. You are coordinating a project with a very telling title, Art Climate Transition, in Riga, the New Theatre Institute. So why did you as a team embark on this project, and what shapes, artistic shapes it will take, and what do you expect from it?
Hello, it's nice to be among you. I'm very honored to be here today. And thank you, Natalie, for actually putting the really important points that it's very difficult to understand complex systems, and also it's very hard, important to put things emotionally. I would also add practically, and thank you, Benjamin, for reminding about this flexibility, smallness, ethical society, and activism. We are a very small NGO, theater NGO. We are only 3-4 people in office, and we don't have any acting space. So I think we are an interesting partner for this European project. And actually what we do, we create the International Theater Festival Homonos every year. And what we do, we really try to be socially active, politically active, and the creative director, Gunda Galaving, she always invites artists who work with local communities. And one of the things that what was important for me, the things that I believe in, is that when we talk about climate change, is to work with young people. It's my strong belief, because they are the next decision makers and those who will create the everyday life choices. And another thing that I've actually come in my mind is that it's important not to use these horror stories or the word crisis or this cascade effect of death and everything else. And as a biology student, I really know what is in front of us. Practically, it is a horror story. But when we start to approach with performances or something that you know scares you, especially young people, emotionally and also psychologically, I think our subconscious really throws this away. So my approach is that it's important to inspire, to be quite positive and inspire for small steps and talk about values and processes in our society, which is also working in all levels, which is the social activism and interdisciplinary and ecofeminism and all those things. And one of the things we've done this summer was a really nice project called Party Animals. You can see on your screens. We invited young people from all kinds of Riga districts to create their own identities, the new identities of successful people. And what they did, they had lectures for the 2 days where they were told about how, for example, clothing industry works, how the fashion industry creates all those piles of garbage. And they went to secondhand, and they got new knowledge how to actually shop ethically and how to create, performance ethically. And they helped each other. They're not professionals, and they worked for 2 days to create their new identities, which made them think about what is the successful person nowadays. Is someone who has the best iPhone, or who has the best clothes, or who has the most likes on Instagram. So, and in the end, they met in a rave party, which was one of the Homo Novus festival performances, where actually the performers were young people themselves in their new identities. So it was very fun, very inspiring, very positive. They were working together with really good artists, and they created their own play, where after which parents were texting me that they don't want to buy new clothes for school, and they don't want to be involved in this fashion industry anymore. So by projects like this, I think when we approach young people, where we actually talk with them, where they create their own performances, is the way that we can actually, as you asked me about this project, to grasp this idea of both social activism and both environmental issues, which are positive in a way. And well, the next idea I'm having in my mind is our festival is small, so I would say it's quite sustainable. We don't buy things, or we don't use plastic or anything like that. But one thing I would like to step further is to invite good chefs and good food makers to create food for festival artists, which is used from the food, let's say food garbage, which is thrown out away from the, which is become a garbage from the shops, when they throw away lots of pails of food, which the term is ended. So we decided it would be interesting to feed the whole festival team from the food that is thrown away, and also which is of course safe and made by good chefs. So that's my idea when we, let's see, have a next festival hopefully in these times.
So thank you very much, Eva. Well, something that was said during the previous discussion, which was whether that's partly the main point of our discussion here. Is it a challenge, or is it an opportunity? I'm personally very confident that we may choose to look at it as an opportunity. And so far, from the three of you, the positive approach and the creative approach does fortify my conviction that it can be and it should be an opportunity for a different kind of future for theatre. And I would like to move to Ben.
Hello.
Hi, Ben. Thank you so much for your patience. I'll try to make it up to you now. The reason why I left you last but not least, Ben, is because you actually work and have worked for many years at the intersection between the creatives and the organizations. And I hinted at this problematic relationship at the beginning, because you may have the creatives jump on this opportunity to change the narratives or their practices even, but then you have the system, you have heavier structures that might find it more difficult to change, and second, to facilitate change for those working inside them. So could you please tell us a little bit about your work and how it relates to our discussion.
Sure, and it might just be useful to know, for those of you from the theatre world, I've been a theatre director most of my life and only moved into the world of climate change back in 2009. So I now combine the two. And the interesting thing also perhaps is that since then I've also done a PhD on a doctorate on how to bring about and how to influence system change, how to bring about system change. And we've been talking about system change quite a lot. And just on that opportunity, I think some of the most interesting work that I've done in my whole career has been in the last 10 years, working on the intersection of climate change and culture. So I certainly think there's an opportunity, and a bit like Alison, I've met some very interesting people, and it's challenged me perhaps even more than directing those plays and running theatres. We've done a lot at Creative Carbon Scotland, working in two fronts. One is helping the cultural sector reduce its carbon emissions and adapt to the impacts of climate change. And I want to stress that adaptation is just as important as carbon reduction, because climate change is happening around us, and that brings some challenges for the whole theatre sector. But on the other side also, and we encourage theatre makers and other cultural practitioners to incorporate climate change into their work in all sorts of ways, from the practical to the conceptual. But the other thing we also do is that we place artists in non-art settings in climate change projects, because we think that artists can bring a whole set of skills and knowledge and references and expertise to those projects that actually the climate change world really needs, because it's a big challenging problem that we've got here. They need every idea they can get. So that's the two main areas that we work on. But just going back to that question of structures, if you like, one of the ways in which we worked from the very beginning at Creative Carbon Scotland, and this comes from my research into behaviour change and system change, is that you need to work with individuals, because individuals do bring about change, but unless the organisations they work with are also thinking about change and supporting change and providing an authorising environment, those individuals can't act. They don't have the agency to bring about change. And similarly, the organizations, if they want to bring about change, they can't do that if the individuals aren't interested in change. And then at the level above, the structures, the funding organizations, the governments, the local governments, the trade unions, the trade associations, they all need to be allowing the organizations to think about change and to bring about change. And similarly, they can't do that unless the organizations are doing it. So we've always worked on this individual organizations and structures approach. We work with funding bodies, we work with the government, and we need to push on all three fronts, I think, to bring about the system change that has been touched upon in the last session, and I think in this one. And I think that system change, I think it was Natalie who spoke about the absolutely crucial importance of emotion. Yes, I agree. The absolute importance of facts. Yes, I agree. But actually, none of these things on their own do it. It needs to bring about system change. You need to operate on all different levels and in many, many different ways. And one of the challenges is you never quite know what it is that brought about that change, but it certainly requires constant pushing in on all sorts of directions and all sorts of different ways. And just sort of following on from that a bit, the other thing that I think we've used quite a lot is working from the bottom up and from the top down. So when we started at Creative Carbon Scotland, I was talking to people within the sector, and there was a reasonable amount of excitement and desire for this work on climate change from the theatre sector and other sectors in the arts as well. But there was also, I went to talk to the government and I said, right, the legislation that you've brought in, how does that apply to the arts? How does that make sense here? And by working from the top down and the bottom up, we were able to bring about real action and real change. So now the cultural sector in Scotland, I think, is way ahead and very supportive of this work. And actually, in many respects, has been leading the funders. There's not a resistance to it at all. It's actually very positive. And alongside that, I think one of the things we've done is we've used regulation. There is, like in England, there is a very challenging set of requirements for cultural organizations to measure and reduce their carbon emissions if they get a certain sort of funding. But also there's a voluntary movement so that many people are doing this. We have 250 odd organizations who belong to our community of practice, the Green Arts Initiative, who do it because they want to. And some of them are required to as well, but only maximum of about 100 of those will be required to. I suppose we've provided a lot of support and enabled that to happen so that people aren't afraid of failing. And I think we also see, as somebody else touched upon, the need to build confidence and do it with a generosity of spirit. We support, we encourage people rather than we're the green policeman or the green nag, and just make sure that people feel very confident in what they're doing. We work with the enthusiasts. We don't worry about the people who aren't enthusiastic. When they realize where the party is, they'll join us. And what we've discovered is that that certainly happens. Because I just want to go back in a way to some of the things that from Benjamin's presentation. There's a wit and a joy, I think, in that small work there, and what we've seen is some opportunities that provides. And I think that what we all constantly need to do is look for the interesting ways of doing things and look for the opportunities. One of the things that came up in the first session was that, and I believe, I didn't see it, but I believe from the young people, business as usual is no longer an option. Change is coming whether we like it or not. And that's because of the carbon reduction requirements, but also the adaptation to the impacts of climate change. So we need to, and I think it's important to remember that the way in which we operate our art system now has not been like this for terribly long. I'm old enough to remember that it was quite different when I started back in the 80s. And it won't be like this in 10, 20 years' time. And actually, we need to make a new future. We need to build a better future post-COVID and what have you. And take the opportunity now. Sorry, I'll stop there. You want me to stop?
Well, the problem is that we have got just a little bit of time left, and because we got a little bit behind schedule today. But I want to follow up from what you were saying, Ben, actually, and just open this final question to everybody for a short, perhaps closing remark. Of course, we need to rate how do we embed sustainability in the theatre and performing arts sector? That was our question. And so obviously we need to raise awareness, we need to mobilize emotions, and we need to change, to break through the system and the current practices. Benjamin, 10 years ago or so, you wrote a manifesto which you addressed to your colleagues in the performing arts sector in Belgium, which basically was like an artistic exercise, asking them to practice very strict environmental rules for a period of 6 months. And that was, this is where you realized, I'm guessing, that the resistance perhaps was greater than you thought. So my final question to everybody, starting from Benjamin, is, how do you think we could break this resistance? What is the fastest and quickest way and more effective way? Benjamin, I don't see you anymore.
There is I don't know if I have an answer to your question, but what I remember is that the resistance was huge, and most of the resistance was like, okay, we respected what you do, but it should be an individual choice. Like all artists, especially all people are free, but all artists are free as well. And so it's your choice to do so, and it's good to do. But art is a place where you can dream and you could do whatever you want. And then there is this thought, like, for instance, in terrorist times, everybody understands that his individual freedom is framed because there is like a bigger necessity. There is like responsibility for everyone to do so that that you cannot do any longer whatever you want to do. And I think this kind of mind change should also come in art. That art is no longer, and this is another thing I want to say, but I will say it later. That art, and especially the organization of art, is no longer this free. This free neoliberal playground that we know until now, and that it's no longer a matter of looking at it as a product to be sold as quick as possible. So so that's a quick answer. But in fact, I wanted to say something else, but maybe.
But please, because we're running out of time, I'm getting messages. But please go ahead and say it.
Together, we have to say important things. No. But I really wanted to say something. I will say it very small, and that is that I really believe in interconnectivity, and I really believe the thing will be a lot of small things. And in art, everything is possible. And of course, art can engage literally into taking position, into finding new ways, into doing propositions. But at the other hand, I think the real value of art is art. And this means that we have to be careful as well that art doesn't get instrumentalized. And I believe that art as well can play a very important role into this whole question, but not always as being the most outspoken, saying like, we should do this, of beware of the catastrophe that is coming, or we should do this. No, art should work on possibilities, and this is what art is, like showing a thing which eventually can become reality. It's like a dream, something. And also art can be as well the place where where you can find a place to give image to your anger, to your grief, to your anxiety. So art should not always be looked at the thing, because we are the out of the box thinkers, like, okay, let's give the final word to the artist. We as well are just part of the whole transition, and we should not forget that the intrinsic qualities of art are very useful as well, although they are not always so outspoken as people should wish they are. So
Thank you,
this is what
Benjamin. I think that's a really rounding up from your side, from your presentation to your comment here. And can I also ask a couple of final words from Natalie and Eva, and just a quick word from Ben as well before we close?
Should I start, or would you like to start, Eva?
Natalie, you go ahead.
I just thought about it. The problem is in a worldwide look that we have to give up privilege, I think. So, for example, it's not only a question of the topic which artists are working on in their production, but how you produce your production. For example, to invite artists from different parts of the country where they don't have so much money, and to stay longer, for example, not only for one performance, but if you invite them, they can show their productions in whole Europe. So it's not the question is who showed the performance first, was it Brussels, Berlin, or Paris? It's really important to work together and to stay longer time in the countries where are you. So, and it's not like, so it's really a deep connection and not a challenge. It's how we can work together. So it would be a worse thing to say, okay, international work isn't possible because we have no chance to fly. It's very important for all the countries to exchange. For example, I was just invited 5 minutes ago from the Jakarta Art Council if I could make a video about the work which I've done in Germany. So we can make this kind of connection when we have this kind of connection. And yeah, it's great to use the possibilities to work together.
Thank you, Natalie. Sorry, we need to start the next session. So I really would like to move to Eva and have a final remark from her as well.
Thank you. Yes. So I think it's important to have courage, firstly, and secondly, to really support those artists who work with the climate justice or climate environmental change issues. So I think be example of your own, like we as institute, we really support artists, give them residencies, support them in these times when it's hard to create work with residencies or giving them a chance to work with these issues.
Thank you, Eva. And Ben, two words.
We need to stop incremental change and move towards transformational change. We can't keep doing the small things we've been doing. And I would say that the interesting artists are the ones who are doing that. So actually, I don't worry about the people. I don't worry about instrumentalization, and I don't worry about the artists who resist, because I think the really good artists are the ones who are doing it and are interested. And that, because all art is politics, and that is what is we are. This is a big political issue, and so the most interesting art is coming out of this topic.
Well, thank you very much, everybody. It's been a pleasure and an honor to have you with us. And I think, I hope everybody who has been following this discussion have been convinced now that what we're facing is not a challenge, but it is definitely a wonderful opportunity for the future. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks again.
Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you for this very rich session that we had, and we come towards the end of today's discussion, only today's discussion, because actually this is the real beginning. We have the pleasure of having with us two European members of the Parliament, apologies, Madame Vereng and Mr. Ninas, who I also saw yesterday. He's very active at the Theatre Forum at the moment. And just to kind of launch this discussion, because we felt as a working group, it was very important to reach out to you both, to the European Parliament, being that greening is a very international, is a very European-wide topic. It's not something we can just carry on ourselves. We need you to support us to be able to make the change happening. And we heard that this morning from very young people, 15, 16 years old activists who said who told us how we can make changes from very small practices to larger actions. We heard from people who were working on the policy side in their particular countries, on the funders as well. And we heard from artists and from people who were very much involved in the day-to-day running of theaters and the culture sector, how they can make changes. Now we're very curious to hear from you how you have been seeing this process happening. You're following closely the European policy making. In the Code Committee, there have been two reports. The report that you have led, Madame Vereng, on effective measures to green Erasmus+, Creative Europe, and the European Solidarity Corps. And then there was also the opinion in which you were involved as shadow rapporteur on the Sustainable Europe Investment Plan, how to finance the Green Deal. And I've also read that you were involved as well in another report on sustainable tourism. So I think you are the right person to speak and to ask you what kind of process do you think the cultural sector should take, what instruments there are at the European policy level to support a process of change in the available funding programs and in the future funding programs of the next MFF. The floor is yours, Madame Vereng.
Hello. First, I would like to thank you for your invitation. I'm very pleased to see you, and I'm very pleased to see my colleague Niklas Ninas, because we unfortunately have not so much occasion to meet in this very strange period. So as you said, we have a very important role to play in the as policymakers, because we have many occasions to earmark culture in the European policies. As you say, we have worked on the Green Deal issues since the beginning of our mandate. And today, at the European level, we work every day to increase the importance of the green transition. Today, 30% in the new budget of the EU that has been decided yesterday is earmarked for the Green Deal. So culture, we think culture should be, as always, the cornerstone of the change. And that's why it's so important that culture, for culture to be in the heart of the policies. As you said, I work on many files on this topic. First, I want to present myself. I'm a French member of the Renew Group, and I'm a coordinator in the Culture Committee for my group. So I work very intensely on this on different topics. And as you said, I've been a rapporteur on an initiative for the greening of the EU programs on education and culture. Even though the biggest part of my report was on the Erasmus Plus program, culture was at the heart of my reflection, because there was a large part of this report about mobility. It's a concern in every program, mainly on Erasmus Plus, but as well on the European Solidarity Corps for youngest, for voluntary programs, and on the creative issue as well. On culture, I had two reflections, and I had two principles. Of course, not to intervene on the creation, which is the field of the artists and the authors. The second was to have a bottom-up approach, to systematize good practices that emerge in the framework of the Creative Europe program. As you said, you have heard young people this morning having new ideas, nice ideas, maybe simple ideas. And for I have to tell you about my experience, because I've met a lot of stakeholders as I was writing and working on this report. I have attended as well the Berlinale, where many roundtables on this topic were organized, and also the États généraux des festivals in Avignon, that was organized by the French Ministry of Culture. And there were a lot of reflection on the greening issue. And I've heard many ideas, very interesting and very simple. So we have to hear from the experience of the artists, technicians, and many ideas were on eco-design, whether we are talking about theater sets. I think there was an idea this morning about these questions, how you construct them and you can reuse. I have this experience in my city where some sets were built with local artists and local people, worker. And so it was a very good thing, without transportation, you know, with local materials. So it was a very good experience. I've heard as well ideas about final location, because we don't always need to go further and further to find good places. And that is related as well with social issues, because we have to work on the status of you know, the social point of we will soon begin to work on this, because we have so many differences in the wages in the sector and different status. So sometimes it's cheaper to go very far away, but it's not a good solution. So we have to work on this social issue. Of course, we have a point as well about technologies, and that is very interesting because there are many progress that are being realizing in the lighting, in energy, and as well in the question of thermic insulation of theaters. So that is connected and related with technology, techniques, and there are as well many programs in the EU, you know, as Horizon Europe that can act on this point, and we have some structure that, like European Institute of Technologies that have a special field on this reflection. There is also many partnership to build with cities, because we have the reflection on the link between urban transplantations and the schedules of the shows. For example, we have a network of European cities called Eurocities that works on this topic, and I have met them, and I met them in my cities as well. That's why, so, you know, all these points I worked on, and they are today in the resolution that we have voted in the European Parliament. And in this regard, the Charter for Creative Europe projects and the wide circulation of good and practices guides seems to be the best idea. So the report has also explored other traits such as the creation of a network of climate and sustainability consultants. It's a new job, very important new job, to advise project leaders and Creative Europe offices. What would I like to say? Yes, today we have to do and to achieve this progress, but first, as the sector is in a very delicate situation, it's hard to ask for groundbreaking changes without sufficient fundings. This is why our CUL committee, where Niklas and I are members, fought a lot for an increase of the Creative Europe program's budget. And in addition, and in our name of MEP name, I'm proud to announce that we managed to add 6,000 million euros to this program's envelope for the next EU budget. Moreover, we have worked intensively so that the cultural and creative actor hit by the consequences of the pandemic could get a decent share of the recovery plan. And the conclusion of his work is a resolution adopted by a large majority of the European Parliament last September, and urging member states to allocate at least 2% of their national recovery plan to cultural and creative sectors. We have to fight again and again for this because it's not adopted yet, but and today only three countries on 27 member states have presented recovery plan for culture. You know, it's Germany, Italy, and France. So we have to act and to fight for this again and again. So I wouldn't be no more longer. I'm here to answer your question. I think my colleague Niklas Ninas would like to add something, and I'm here to answer your questions.
Thank you very much, Madame Fareng. You touched upon quite a lot of issues that we actually wanted to ask you. So you have been answering already quite a lot of our questions. But indeed, I mean, we are in difficult times. The recovery plans are absolutely needed for our sector because it touches on the heart of what we do. Being mobile, working with a live audience, and it's interesting to observe that it takes time for countries to actually take that into their plans. They look at the larger industries, but they seem to forget that actually our sectors, dare I say that these words, because we have just been also acknowledging the intrinsic value of arts, and even the fact that the sector shouldn't be an instrument to kind of advocate the green notion. But at the same time, we are also an economic industry. We employ people, we create jobs, we generate tourism, etc. So do you see any would you have any advice to us how we can ask our politicians in the member states to include culture in, and the green, of course, the green notion, but to include culture in their recovery plans? It's a bit aside of what we are discussing now, but nevertheless, the green is an overarching scope, and perhaps you can answer already this question. And then Niklas, I will definitely come to you. Would you like to answer this question?
It's my turn to answer?
Yes, please.
Yes. So I think first you can talk about the work we are doing in the European Parliament, because there are many things to say today. We have this resolution. We have a fight in this time because, you know, for the recovery plan, there is a text for the recovery and resilience facility where we want to earmark this at least 2%. We have to fight again, and we are doing it in this at the time we are speaking with Niklas, and I hope it will be adopted, but it's a fight. Also, you have something to find in the cohesion policy and the European, the regional funds, because we have added the mention of culture everywhere. You have this REACT EU program where culture has been added, because as you said, it's for the culture, but it's linked with tourism, and Europe has raised this topic of tourism, but not something, you know, you have to take some ways to talk about culture with something that can be considered, because it's not true, but tourism is a good way to talk about culture. So I know we have different culture, we are from different countries. In some, culture is maybe considered as more important for our leaders, political leaders. So you have this European work that is very, very important and shared by the majority of the member of parliament. So talk about it, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'll turn to my colleague Silke Larvani, who will introduce the conversation with Niklas Ninas.
Yes, hello everybody. Hello to all European colleagues. I'm very happy to introduce our second guest in this concluding session. Welcome, Niklas Ninas. I have seen you already, so I know you are here. Thank you so much for joining us and also following the European Theatre Forum. Mr. Ninas, you were elected last year member of the European Parliament as a German citizen, and you're part of the group of Greens. You have been contributing in Parliament to make the voice of culture heard quite a lot, as your colleague Ms. Fareng as well, since the beginning of the pandemic, actually, with first an open letter to the EU, with supporting the demand of the 2% for culture that we just addressed. You're also the coordinator of the European Parliament Cultural Creators Friendship Group, a sort of coalition in the European Parliament with members from 6 different political groups. And the aim of this group actually is to improve the whole European cultural ecosystem. So we are sure we have the right speaker here. Please, Mr. Ninas, for the statement. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me today again, after I spoke yesterday concerning the workers' rights, which is also a very important issue that we're tackling in the CCFG, in the Cultural Creators Friendship Group. And also in the European Parliament, obviously. Now for the greening, I was very interested in hearing all these statements that were made, and it's good to see Laurence here in this meeting as well, since she was the rapporteur for the initiative report of the Cult Committee concerning the greening of the cultural sectors. And so we can see that we have already done a lot of research, for one part as the European Parliament, but then also from the other part, from the sector itself, from all the members and all the involved actors in the sector. And so the research is done. A lot of people have proposed different strategies and ideas. And I have to say, when I heard about this report the first time, I was a little bit skeptical, because I think that if we talk about only about how can we reduce carbon dioxide emissions in the cultural sector, I think that would be too easy or too non-relevant. Because, to be quite honest, if we're talking about transport, and that is a relevant issue, however, it is one that, in my understanding, falls rather under the question of, for example, the Transport Committee, in which we consider how can we ensure that logistics and personal transport are carbon dioxide free. And if that's solved, then the biggest issue for the cultural sector will be gone as well. The next idea would be the production. Yes, the production firms, and depending on the set, you have more resources used, and so on and so forth. However, this is also an issue that could be solved in other directions. For example, in the European Parliament, in the ITRE committee, which is responsible for industry. So if we have a general carbon-free production of goods in Europe, then this problem is mainly taken care of as well. So where really goes the idea of greening of the cultural sector? And I think the biggest impact that the whole cultural sector has always had and will always have is not so much on their direct touching of production or the direct input of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, but the biggest impact that the cultural and creative sector has is always into the society, into the people that are listening, that are following, that are touched by the ideas and the art that is created. And this power, this influence needs to be used in order for the greening. That is the real question that we need to solve. And that is the real issue that we need to tackle with the culture and creative sector. If we want a carbon-free Europe by 2050, if we want a future for this planet that has a huge biodiversity, if we want a better future for our children and grandchildren, then we need a change of society. We don't just need to change the way we produce. We don't just need to change the way we travel and do logistics. We need to change as a society and as persons, and we need to reevaluate our values and our way of life. And the only force that can deliver on this is not politics, is not science. It is always education and arts and culture, because culture has this huge impact on the society, can really question everything we do as society. And that is, I believe, the biggest challenge also for the cultural creative sector to actually deliver on this if they want so. Because I, as politician, cannot, will not, and must not tell artists what to do and what to focus in their arts. The art is free, and it is especially free from the influence of any politicians. But if we want to deliver on the greening of the planet, but also on the greening of society, and in that I believe it is important to also talk about the social aspects of the change that we are about to happen. It's a big question that we need to discuss and need to answer, probably also in the cultural sense. Then we need to follow a discussion, or we need to start a discussion in the cultural sector that is led by scientific evidence. And I believe the first instance that from me personally is important for the sector is something called, in German, it has the funny name of BNE. In English, I don't know if there's a similar abbreviation, but it's called the Education for Sustainable Development. And that is something in which I worked on previously, and that showed me if we want to educate the whole continent on this issue, on this very important issue, we need to start by the multiplicators. So we need to ensure that everybody who is interested in talking about this issue gets proper education, gets all the information that they want and that they need. So examples that I heard earlier from several speakers of production helpers and education in the production sectors is very much needed. And I think that is something that we must deliver on. It is good that we have this initiative report on greening of the European Parliament and the European programs, which will enable, for example, that Creative Europe will have a stricter standard on greening initiatives and so on. That is definitely a good place to learn. But I think we need more initiatives to go into all of the member states, because that is what's missing at the moment, and to help all the member states to develop more on education on sustainable development, not just on CO2 reduction, but on the whole chain of sustainable development, which I deem is very important for the whole societal discussion that only culture can really lead to. I want to leave it here. I just want to mention 2 words concerning the question that that was asked earlier to Laurence, because I want to mention something on there as well. How can we've heard Laurence has said it already, we have an increase of 600 million euros for the Creative Europe program. We also have an increase of 2.2 billion euros for the Erasmus Plus program, bringing those 2 programs to 2.2 billion for the Creative Europe and 23.5 billion for the Erasmus program. This is great news. We are still fighting to get the possibility for the RRF funding to be delivered into the member states. There will definitely be the possibility, but we want obviously to make it mandatory for the member states to actually spend the money on culture. There is in REACT-EU, as Laurence said, the possibility to get funding for culture. There is the possibility in all the structural funds. I have to repeat that in all the structural funds that are already existing, there is the possibility to get funding for structural infrastructure for the creative and cultural sector. And there's also in the ESF the possibility to use that ESF funding to, for example, promote education in the arts, to access schools and deliver on musical schools and so on. This is possible with the ESF. So with all the funds that we have, here's my message to everybody who's looking for more funding and who's asking what can we do. Get politically involved. It really depends on what the regions and the member states do with the money, and they are the ones that program right now how to use and how to spend this money that we are allocating from the European Union. In every instance, there is somehow the possibility to use it for cultural purposes. It is rarely done because there's no interest or no knowledge of it on the ground, on the issue where the people are working on, so in the regions. So this is the place where you need to get involved, where you need to go to your regional department, to your managing authority in your member state, in your region, and tell them now that you want support for the cultural sector, that you need either from this or that structural, social, or whatever fund support for the creative sector and your project in the area. If that's written down, everybody in the area and in the region can apply for funding. If it's not written down, then it's not a possibility. So please get involved right now into the political process of programming those funds. And that's where I'll leave it away.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Madame Fareng, would you like to comment to what Ms. Nina said?
Ninas is absolutely right. You know, in this time where we are beginning the new regional fund programs, and there is this possibility to get money from the region, and that's very important in policies. And I think culture has to be more local, mostly in this time, because you see, you can't only have big national policies. We need local policies as well. And I followed for my region the different topic, and I read this point. There's not enough culture, but you have the possibility. And when I met a cultural actor, I tell them the same thing that Niklas said: go and see your local politician responsible and ask them for that. That's a very huge opportunity for them. I absolutely agree.
Thank you very much. I think I have my colleagues from the working group who perhaps also might raise or want to ask you a question. I see Evgenia and Thomas visible. I wonder if Elizabeth is there. I can't see the others. Who would like to start with the first question? Evgenia, yes, please.
Yes, hello, and thank you both very much for joining us today for this concluding discussion. I would like to say that the report of the cult community, I thought it was extremely thorough and comprehensive, which is a great ground, hopefully, for building further policies in this direction. And I also want to say I couldn't agree more with Niklas Ninas about the agency of the culture sector and the important role it can play. So my question is this: is there a plan in the foreseeable future to expand the policy that has just been applied on Creative Europe and Erasmus Plus to other areas in the culture policies of the EU? And is there a way to bypass and expedite the change, to bypass the reluctance of certain national governments in this respect?
Difficult question. Who like to take the answer?
I'll give it a try at least. I don't know if there's a plan to increase the. Sorry, I need to shut this down for a second. To increase the implementation on other cultural funds, and for the question on how to comply with member states that are not while working on the rules of Creative Europe, for example. I know of examples, for example, from Poland, where Poland doesn't pay up the needed fee, the additional fee that the member states needs to pay, and therefore a lot of projects could not work out. This is tremendous horrible, because I think that there's really the try to undermine liberal arts again and again from several authoristic member states. However, the possibility that you can do, and that I know has been done, is to get involved with a different project. Because if the main projecteer is from a different country, then this country has to pay up the main fee, and you can run as a small participant project. I know this is not ideal, but it is a way to still deliver on these issues.
Yeah, very interesting. Thank you. Madame Faring?
Yes, it's difficult to intervene in the European policies, but we have, in the recovery plan, we have this right of law conditionality that we are fighting for again and again. It's more or less agreed, but we have some discussion with tough countries as Hungary or Poland. But our negotiators and all the parliaments is fighting, not all, but most of the MEP are fighting for that, and my group is doing that. That's the first thing I wanted to say. The other one is that we can have as well transversal policies. You maybe have heard about this project of the European Commission that is called BAOS project. It's a beginning and it's not very clear. So we have to make our work in the parliament about this topic. But the idea is to is to achieve something with artists, creators all over the countries. So maybe there is something to do to get a kind of European status for artists, and this can bypass sometimes the problem with some kind of countries and you know, the problem that we have.
Thank you. Yeah, a very interesting idea, and creating a safe haven actually for our artists. I think we
Actually,
have got several messages. Oh, sorry, to close down, but final words. I thought you had to leave.
Yes, I have to leave, but I just want to add one thing because Laurence mentioned something very good there. One issue that I want to tackle in the upcoming term, or in this term, is the question of how funding is distributed. We know of several member states, so I mean national funding for culture. We know of several member states that are distributing funding only under certain rules that precede their ideology. For example, in Poland, you only get funding if you are compliant with the trigger words state, God, and nation. And if your project doesn't have anything to do with that, or is not in compliance with that, is critical with God or the state or the nation, then you don't get any funding. And this is something that we cannot accept, that we cannot have possible in Europe, because it diminishes the freedom of the arts. And therefore, I want to ensure that we have a common rule set for cultural funding in Europe that ensures that we have a playing level field in every member state, that everybody who is an artist can benefit of the freedom of the arts and therefore get funding for their project, and that all the funding is only based on quality and not on ideologic ideas of the government.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid we have to close this session. How eager we are to continue the discussion, but we hope we find another moment. Many thanks to Madame Fareng, to Mr. Ninas, and to my colleagues who have been helping us to make this, I hope you will agree with this, an interesting session. This is only the start. We see it as a process for the Theatre Forum to continue the discussions. So surely you will hear more from us in the coming weeks or months. But in the meantime, I also would like to sincerely thank you on behalf of the whole culture community for your immense efforts that you do to defend the culture sector, to defend also a good support in funding. We need it more than ever, and we're very grateful for all the efforts that you take. Be assured of that. So with that, and without further ado, I think Gina is probably, and Ian is probably taking over to tell the next step for this afternoon. Thank you.
And the discussion continues in the piano room, actually, if you want to have more exchange. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much for these very interesting last talks for the day, and really great inspirational speech by Niklas Ninas. We conclude this second day now. We thank all the speakers. We thank everyone for their attention, of course. We will meet back tomorrow at 9:15 for a day dedicated to European theaters as a public space and to international collaborations. And to conclude, of course, together these 3 days of work and exchange.
But until then, we are inviting you to the theater. We want to encourage everyone to join my colleagues at Schauspiel Dresden for the 10th edition of the Fast Forward Festival for Young Stage Directors, which starts today at 2:15 and will be happening, of course, online. The link, www.fast4w.art, can be found on the European Theatre Forum's website. Please continue to use the forum platform to continue the interesting discussions on sustainability in the theatre and performing arts sector, in the piano room, on the platform, and the network among each other. We wish you fruitful meetings.